Okay, gone into the living room. I lost Melissa Biggs Bradley. Okay, here we go again. Indagare. Indagare found her. That's a bummer. So I just got cut off because my Wi-Fi is terrible in one part of the apartment. Hopefully. Hi, happy Monday. Hopefully, I can get Melissa back. Hmm. No.
Hey,
Hey,
can you
sorry.
see me?
That was my Wi-Fi. It just,
Oh, and I was worried it was mine.
I think it was mine. I
You froze for me and
also,
buffering. Okay.
I could still see you, but whatever. So funny. It's perfect timing as you're like, we should really use the internet more. And um, so you realize that you were not using all of the assets that you could use that you had
Yeah.
garnered as an editor, and that you weren't connecting the dots for the viewer, in that they were seeing images that they then wanted to, or getting information that they wanted to then act upon, and couldn't.
Yeah.
Not with.
Yeah, and
So
and we just had such limitations of space. And so it was, this idea that you only had the pages of a magazine and the number of words you could put in. And so we would discover so many things, so many of the best things I thought were not, what's the hotel to stay in Capri, but what is the special little restaurant, and what's the boat driver that you want, and what's the secret way to get to this garden. And that was the stuff that always never made it into the article. So I thought, if we could produce something online where we had an infinite amount of space, and if you wanted to go to Paris, you could figure out, do I want to go to Paris to see art, or do I want to go and drink wine, and what are the best places for all of these different things, or buy kids clothing. And the internet would allow us to do that. So I started it with this idea of, we'll give much better travel information if we have a lot more space, and if you and I can have feedback. So if I don't have something that you want, you're going to Delhi and you want to figure out where to buy textiles and it's not on the website, you could send in and say, where should I go in Delhi? And we can give you advice. But then also you could say, and by the way, I just found this unbelievable jeweler that anybody going should
right.
have, and kind of crowdsource in a vetted sort of TripAdvisor way, because nobody believes TripAdvisor because you don't know who you're hearing from. And that was the original idea, was we're just going to start as an online magazine
For me,
and kind of community. And then as soon as we started getting these phone calls from people who said, and they were amazing people who'd signed up for the content, who said, I don't know how to do a yacht charter in Alaska, or I want I want to figure out how to go to St. Petersburg with
yeah,
my kids.
I don't know. I don't want to learn.
Yeah.
Like, please, like that's too hard.
And it was just like, could you please do it for me? And initially I said, no, I can't. I'm not a travel agent.
Yeah.
I'm a journalist, but as a researcher, I'll find you somebody good. And I couldn't find anybody that I would turn my friends over to. And so we started, helping people, because we knew who the person was who had the boat in Alaska, and we knew the person to take you around.
How long did this transformation take from information aggregator and curator to actor?
Well, we kind of did it secretly almost for a year. So if you called and were begging us to help you, we would say, okay, fine, we'll help. And we did it and tried out whether or not we were any good at it.
Yeah.
And after about a year or so, when we realized we really know what we're doing, we started training people and sending them out in the world and coming back. And so it took us, really a year or two.
What do you mean, training people and sending them out into the world?
Well, I mean, now we have a staff of 80 people, and they come into a true training program, and we have the idea of places we know where our clients like to go the most. So, they start with Europe and they really have to know the European capitals. And then we start, they can specialize in different places. But my whole concept was, I don't want to plan a trip with somebody who hasn't actually been there. And so we hire people who are avid travelers, and then we send them out in the world and we say, okay, go to Mallorca, spend 2 weeks seeing every hotel and great restaurant and meeting everybody you can, and come back and tell us like what's the best way to go. And then we institutionalize all that information so that anybody who's going gets to rely on those updates. So we now have, we still have the content, and people join and just get the content if they really want to plan their own trips and they just want really good information. That's a large part of our membership. And then we have what we call our custom planner membership, which is for people who don't want to do that. They want to just talk to someone and say, this is why I want to go to Peru, and this is who's in my party, and how do I do it? And they have the whole thing mapped out for them. And then probably 12 years ago, we had people.
How long has it been since
it's been 15 years.
What?
Yeah, it's been 15 years. I know.
How did that happen? I feel like I still feel like it's so new.
I know. No, it's crazy. And about 12 years ago, I had people say, you go on these scouting trips to figure out a destination. Would you ever let me go with you to Morocco or with you to India? Because, I don't have a girlfriend who wants to go, or my husband doesn't want to go. And so we started doing these small group trips, and now we do a lot of them, and we do them with some of my favorite ones we've ever done have been in partnership with Architectural Digest, and many people that So Mitch Owens and Gay Gassman, and we do them with the Wall Street Journal. So Sarah Medford, who's their design editor, I'm about to go to the south of France with her and go to Rose Tarlow's house and Pierre Yovanovitch's house. And so those are really, really fun.
So and then we'll get on to Safari Style, but I just have to tell you, like, my goal in life is to go to Egypt. And for whatever reason, I have either not been able to go, or the timing's been wrong, and again, it's wrong. You're going in October, right?
Actually, I'm not going again until a year from November.
Okay.
We have trips going probably every 3 or 4 months to Egypt because it's so popular. And so we'll have small groups, but in next November 23, we have taken over one of the Oberoi boats on the Nile. So it's just going to be our members or travelers. And we're doing it with Barron's, the Wall Street Journal's sort of lifestyle magazine, is something called Penta. And we're doing it with them. But honestly, it is the most incredible place in the world, because it's where all civilization, language, arts, religion, science, it all started there. And you can still go into these tombs that are 4,000 years old and see the paintings on the wall. It's incredible.
Yeah. I mean, it speaks to me. I need to go. So I will.
Good.
I
would love it. And
possible, but next November, I'm going to go with you.
Come, I would love it, because not only is there, the antiquities, and it really is like the birth of all civilizations, but they are opening finally this Grand Egyptian Museum.
Yeah.
And it's going to be the largest museum in the world for antiquities. And they had kept a ton of King Tut's treasures in storage for years and years and years, because they understood that they didn't have the technology and the science to preserve everything perfectly. So there's tons of stuff that no one has ever seen before that they're finally going to have on display. So it's really going to be amazing.
And that is, for me, the trip of a lifetime.
Yeah.
The trip of a lifetime. I still have a postcard from my father saying, I think I was like 8 or 9 or something when he went, saying, "Dearest darling Alexa, you are not going to believe it."
Yeah.
When you are not going to believe your eyes when you see Egypt.
And you can't explain it because of the scale of the monuments, and you truly can't. It's mind-bending.
It's mind-bending. So quick recap on everything that you do. So degree in creative writing, knowing the nuts and bolts of publishing, then being an editor and getting, the big picture along with all the little pictures that you already know, then bringing it online, creating content, then training huge force, taking people out on these trips. And now, just because, so much free time, you publish a book.
I did.
And it's beautiful. And you sent me one. And of course, you don't think I already own that book? Do you really think I hadn't bought that book?
You know what? It's still a good gift because they
Great.
did such a Vendome, who's my publisher, did such a beautiful job with the cover that they turned it into a decorative object.
Totally.
And so it isn't just that. I mean, obviously I hope people use it because I want people to travel, but it is the most perfect decorative object. And I've had so many women come up to me and say, oh my God, it's the first coffee table book I bought for my son's grown up apartment. And I think, okay, that's so perfect because that's what it should be. It's an object. But yeah, no, I mean, over the course of all of my travel, I think I mentioned that I went to Kenya on safari when I was 12 with my grandmother, who just loved being on safari. And she was just an incredible character and really important to me. But I fell totally in love with Africa, and I got to go back many, many times because of Town and Country and because of Indagare. And what I saw in Africa was really the best expression of what I think makes tourism so. There are two things that make tourism or travel so profound to me. One is how it changes you as a person when you get to go to other places that are foreign to you and see how other people live, and it shifts your perspective on your life and how you can live your life. The other part of travel that I think is so transformative is how it can have an impact on the people that are visited. And in Africa over the years, what I saw was these incredible lodges and visionaries that were, building these lodges to have sustainable places, but were teaching the communities why it was so important to protect the environment and the wildlife. And more than governments, individuals building beautiful lodges were having an impact on keeping cultural heritage and wildlife and environments in pristine states. And I just saw this transformation where it was really every single person who goes on safari is having an impact on saving what is, fastly disappearing, these endangered species and these endangered habitats. And so I was so excited about that.
People, I'm sure, think, luxury travel. Like this is, over the top, it's big trips, but it needn't be. It is this critical bridge. And the fact that Indagare has committed to its impact fund, the name of the coffee table book is Safari Style. Sorry, I broke a nail. But that you have committed to this impact fund, that your members all participate. It is that last piece that expresses how important it is, and at the same time lets you feel good about it.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I think,
About carbon footprints and
yeah.
and airfare or airlines. I mean, air travel.
Yeah, and the thing is, Alexa, you're right that I mean, in my book, I do focus on the most beautiful lodges in East and Southern Africa, and they are really stunning examples of design, but also, environmentally sensible architecture and sustainable architecture. But they're spectacularly beautiful and organic, and they're of the place, and yet it was often, in many cases, the people who have the most money who can lead the way in doing the right thing. And so a lot of these are expensive camps. A percentage of every single stay goes back to the environment and to the community. But they're also paving the way for, as you said, an awareness in all of tourism in Africa of how important this is. So you can go on an incredible safari and not spend a lot of money. I mean, I always think, my book, we only got to cover 20 some lodges because, again, the constraints of space. But there are hundreds of lodges in Africa that are making a difference and are at all price points. And every single person who's going and emphasizing the value of seeing our natural world in a pristine state is making a difference, because they've now really turned the whole philosophy. I mean, one of my great safari friends said to me, Melissa, over the last 20 years, we've watched safaris go from being extractive, like mining, to becoming something that is additive and is actually putting back into the environment good. And I think that's what all travel should do. I mean, you talk about carbon footprint. Ultimately, we all have to be aware that we're, on a planet that whether we share borders or not, we're all responsible for, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think we need to go and see things because we don't have an appreciation for what we need to protect if we're not aware of it. But there are ways to offset the carbon damage. And, and that's what our impact fund is we pay to cover that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's worth it.
Also, as a person who loves decoration and architecture, I've never been on safari. My husband, who lived in Africa for 8 years, obviously has been on safari, and he's always saying we have to go, we have to go, we have to find a time in our lives to go and take the children. And I it's like, for those of us engaged with architecture, it's always like not on my immediate top list. But there is something, I feel that I must at some point, just when you were just saying the importance of perspective and having the realization as the traveler, the value it brings to the person who's doing the traveling, of just how small you are in the universe, or seeing these majestic animals, and really pulling yourself out of your usual rhythms, which are for me sightseeing and buildings. I do feel like it's a really important thing that I need to do to get that other layer, that other piece that I don't tend to.
Well, and the funny thing is, Lexi, I have heard this from so many people. In fact, a good friend of mine, who's a decorator, you probably know, Michael Smith, right now is in Africa at two of the lodges that are about to be, he's at one now, he's about to go to the other one, that are in my book. And he has had no interest in going for years. And it was his partner who was dying to go. And I kept saying, you will love it. And there are lots of other designers who come back so inspired. It isn't about necessarily the structural buildings, as you said, and art. There isn't art in architecture, but we as human beings are so inspired by nature and by, as you said, the majesty of the locations and the organic beauty of the way one lives in Africa. We all come from there. I mean, Homo sapiens come from the Great Rift Valley. And there's this weird sense of homecoming that people feel. And so the inspiration for nature and humanity, I think, will blow your mind, even if it's not, looking at paintings and buildings.
Yeah, it's an important, like perhaps the way somebody would feel if they go to the Galapagos and they're just surrounded by awe-inspiring beauty. But
Yeah.
I got,
the Galapagos, I'm one of the few people on the planet who sort of is like, yeah, the Galapagos.
that building.
Put safari way ahead of it.
Yeah, interesting. It's interesting where what each of us depresses on our to-do list or elevates it. We're all seeking out something, and it's interesting, like why are we drawn to certain things? In the last few years, I know there was another trip that you went on with Mitch to Lebanon that I was dying to go to. You seem to be in Syria, in Lebanon, in Africa. Is that where you're finding your heart right now?
No, I love the Middle East. I'm kind of an equal opportunity travel obsessive. So I love Paris as much as I love safari, and they couldn't be more different in some ways. One is maybe the greatest expression of sort of civilization, and the other is the greatest expression of what we often call in our office the works of God versus the works of man. But I really love the Middle East, and I've been lucky to spend time in a lot of places. Lebanon, we did 2 trips with Architectural Digest and I was so thrilled because we had 25 people on each of those trips, which was our maximum. And at that point, there's so many misperceptions about the Middle East in our news. And again, that's one of the reasons that I think travel is so important, is we have to be our own reporters. I was in Iran right before, actually while Trump was being elected. We didn't think that was going to happen. And I thought Iran was really safe because we were about to sign a nuclear deal with them. But the perception that we have of Iran or Saudi, where I'm going back again in October, is so limited by what is in the news about, and it's usually about governments. And so it's,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
if America was only perceived by the news about our government by the rest of the world, it would be a very, you know, there would be very few people who came here a lot of the time. I mean, seriously.
Yeah.
And so, you know, unfortunately, it's when you're on the ground and you're with other people and you realize they're not that, you know, they're trying to make a living, they're trying to support their families, they're trying to build a home, and they want to be at peace. And that's the majority. I mean, I've met the most sophisticated, intelligent, really, you know, politically intelligent people in on the streets of Iran, who bear nothing but great love and admiration for the United States. And before I went, people were saying, oh, you know, they say death to America in the streets. I mean, we all have extreme parts of our populations, and that doesn't
And
represent the face of the whole country.
we don't necessarily identify all the time by our nationality. We are, you know, I don't think about my Americanness all the time. When I travel, I'm, you know, that's not my first identifier.
Yeah.
You know, we are seekers. We are doing all, you know, I think we all, the reason why Anthony Bourdain's shows were so great was that it did let us see places that maybe we couldn't get to. They're too far away. We've got too much work. It's too expensive to get there. And we got to see a little bit, but of course through a screen. So it's totally
Yeah.
different.
But it's exactly what he did. Was he introduced you to the people? You know,
Yeah.
it was around food, but it was like, it was normal everyday citizens, and that's what we don't get in the news. And so that's where, you know, it's like, you know, Lebanon people were so nervous before they came with me, you know, but wait, I all I see is, you know, bombing in Lebanon, and, you know, is it going to be dangerous? And when they got there, I have one friend who came, and her husband was so nervous about her going, and I explained to her, I was like, downtown Beirut, and this was before the blast, so sadly a lot was destroyed, but you know, it was incredibly sophisticated, thriving place. And he said, what do you see outside your window? And she said, I see an Hermes and a Chanel. And I mean, it was, you looked out the window of the
Not the
Grand
best,
Hotel. Yeah,
of
it
any.
looked like Beverly Hills. But you know, there's so many misconceptions, and there is so much talent and, you know, incredible history and heritage in, you know, throughout the Middle East that I do love seeing, and great architecture and art and design.
Pavlos, my husband, who you know, who is
Yeah.
Greek. We go to Greece to see the family. We just went to Greece for 10 days to see his parents, who we hadn't seen since the beginning of COVID, and his grandmother, who just turned 106.
Oh my God.
Who still lives on her own. But, you know, while we were there, Greece is so fortunate to have figured out their tourism. You know, clearly it's such an important part of their economy, their world, but they make it so easy for such a long trip. You know, that's
Yeah.
a trip. You get there and they've figured it out, and you know, tourism is just it's so important. It's so important to do everything that you're saying.
Yeah.
Uh, and
And frankly, the lockdown, I think, really was a huge reminder of that. I think in many ways, people kind of took travel for granted before COVID because it was so easy and cheap
yeah,
to go places, and now it's not as easy and not as cheap. But people realized what was missing, and they realized that they had kind of put all these things on hold, and they really, that you might not be able to wait forever.
so what is your experience at Indagare? Like, I mean, you're a finite number of trips, right? How many trips do you sponsor a year? I mean, you're doing the two things. You're creating content and you're facilitating trips and you're hosting trips. You're doing three things. So how many do you guys sponsor a year?
I think this year we probably did 40 small group trips.
Huge.
I mean, I don't do every single one of them, but I think we ran around 40 small group trips. But yeah, no, most of what we do is send individual people out on the road. And, you know, and for me, you know, going back to sort of what's happened after COVID, it was it was pretty extraordinary last year to be among the first people to go to Europe again. Or, we were the first group to take people to Africa. I took 2 sets of people to see the gorillas in Rwanda, November of 2020. So it was pre-vaccine, and no one who saw, and at the time, honestly, it was one of our members who texted me. I was in Southampton, it was 2 years ago now, in August, had not left basically my house or the environs of the town of Southampton for 3 or 4 months. It was the longest I'd slept in the same bed in years. I said to my husband, oh my God, for the first time, and we've been married for 25 years, and it's the first time we've ever lived together, because it was 3 straight months I was home. But this guy emailed me and he said that borders have opened in Rwanda. Do you think it would be a good time to go? And I said, usually you have to book 2 years in advance because it's so hard to get permits to go and see them.
Yep.
And you could absolutely, it'd be an amazing time. He said, well, why don't you take us? Why don't you take a small group? And I thought, well, no one in their right mind is going to travel. Again, going back to August of 2020, when people were afraid to go out of their house without wipes and masks. They're not going to get on a plane and fly to Africa to see the gorillas. But I thought, well, I might as well try. And
those destinations, the end destination, they need sponsorship.
Well, that was exactly it. I mean, it was the most profound trip. We ended up offering it and selling out 2 trips. So I went for 3 weeks. I did 2 back-to-back trips of 12 days, 10 or 11 days. And what we saw was exactly that. Just, when there is no tourism and there are countries with no safety net, they lose their entire livelihood. It is shocking how much tourism supports. And so, it was really, and even in Europe, going and seeing, certain places that survived because they had aid, or they had domestic travelers, and other places that, just went, and we saw this in our own neighborhood. I mean, you and I live in New York. We've seen so many restaurants and stores just disappear because there were no people coming here.
Yeah. And they'd come and they'd catch COVID.
Yeah. And yet, what was exciting is when you're among the first people out there and you remember part of what travel is having these shared global experiences. So talking to people, whether it was in France or Italy, who hadn't dealt with Americans in a year and a half. And I'll never forget being in a store in Florence and the guy said, we're having a sale, but I'm going to give you an extra 15% off because you're the first VAT form I filled out in 2 years. And he said, thank God you came back. And tell people we're desperate to have you again.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, and we've got to figure it out.
Yeah.
Also, regardless of where you live on the political spectrum, you need to get out of it. You need to think about that. You got to, for your own sake, for your survival, you got to get your head out of that and see things, whether it's across the country or longer, further.
Yeah. So for you, as someone who is inspired by travel, what are some of the most amazing places? Because again, I know your dad was an encyclopedia of seeing incredible things. So what were some of the most amazing things that have inspired you?
Well, stop that. No. I can be inspired almost anywhere. I love trips in America. Now I love car trips, not with any of my family. The minute my family gets in the car with me, I hate them all. I really hate them. I want to throw my kids out of a moving car when we're in the car together. We have family fights that are brutal. It's amazing that we can all emerge later from the car, but I would have to drive 5 hours places. And I had something in Ohio, and I said, do you want me to drive there? Now I can, a beautiful drive, and our country is amazing. So I really want to, I have left that alone. I need to go do the Hoover Dam. I need to do, like I said, I ignore nature over man-made things. I've gone to all the places that you would imagine I would go in Europe, being like a European derived human being. I love Australia, but I'm desperate for Africa.
Yeah.
desperate to go to.
Well, and your kids are the perfect age because, you know, you don't want to take them when they're too young. And,
Yeah.
you know, it's much more complicated once everyone's like, you know, in college or working.
Right, but also, at some point I gotta just pull the trigger whether they come with us or not.
Yeah.
Pavlos took an amazing trip with the Institute of Classical Art, Architecture and Art to Ireland, and it was, of course we'd like to take our kids with us everywhere, but we can't, and we can't just, we can't cease.
Yeah.
I need to feed my inspiration. That trip was
Yeah.
these I am because my father was an encyclopedia, we would travel and he would have this running commentary. He actually got into a fight. It was Troika, and we were in St. Petersburg at the Hermitage, and we had a 21-year-old, very serious lady, but very young, telling us whatever. And she said something that was wrong. And my father, being, his personality, was let that go by. And he
Well, he
corrected.
wanted to educate her. I mean, that's the thing about your father. He knew so much, but I'm sure he wanted to educate her.
But it was Rika. I mean, she was towing the line. Like she did not believe what he was saying. He was like, no, no. They got into it, and I mean, I'd seen my father behave like this many times. And when it starts, you start going like, oh, and retreating into your shell. Not that I seem to have a shell, but I do
Yeah.
have far, far deep in there. I have a shell. And I ran into people later who, years later, who said, "Oh, we had a tour guide who remembers your father." And I was like, "Oh no!" But
Oh,
in
how
his
funny.
absence, as a grown woman who goes with her husband and sometimes with her children places, I am happy to have a tour guide. We would never do that when I was younger because my father was like, "I know this. I don't need a tour guide." But we want a tour guide. We want trips like the ICA. We'd
Yeah.
love an Indagare trip because as wonderful it is, and it's totally valuable and valid to stumble around and experience it in an unstudied way, unchoreographed tourism.
Yeah.
There is so much to learn and to know that I would love, at the very least, a trip. It doesn't have to be every trip that
Yeah.
I go to that place, but I need to start off with some information. When I've been to India or when I've been to China or Japan, those are not countries and regions I'm as familiar with. I have so much catching up to do. I have a bazillion questions, and I always like those trips to be with an historian, a tour guide, a whatever.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And it's funny because we do trips for ICAA in partnership with ICAA. And we're doing one actually just in September to Paris. And, you know, I've lived in Paris. And when we have these amazing guides that are getting us access, you know, into places like, you know, the national warehouse of national treasures for all of the royal palaces, or into the Chateau de Bagatelle that's being restored, and you get to be with, we have this incredible art historian and garden expert, and she's telling you the stories of what goes on, and it's like a, you know, it's like a soap opera the way she's recounting all of the sort of trysts that went on and travails in the building and all that kind of stuff. And to me it's like, you know, it's like being spoon fed, and it's kind of continuing education. And I agree with you, it's wonderful just to walk around, but there's nothing better than going on a trip where you're just getting a dose of, you know, just spoon fed incredible information, and you don't have to do the research, and you've got somebody who's passionate, who lives and breathes it and can bring it to life, and makes it really exciting. So I totally agree.
Never going to get enough information. Like people, back to like, I've got to stop putting off Africa. It's people like, oh, well, you need this amount of time to go. You can't wait till that amount
Yeah,
of time is available because it may never come. And even if you go to India and you go to two places, like
I
start
completely agree with you.
to, it will require, if you're lucky, you'll go more than once, but
Yeah.
you can't put the onus on yourself to get it all.
Yeah. No, no, absolutely. I mean, I think you're much better off going someplace and having, a really immersive, wonderful experience of a couple of days and getting a taste than not going at all and waiting for that big time. Because it just doesn't, life doesn't work that way.
There's also, I think, I was just at Sotheby's this morning speaking to somebody and talking about, as it's a big conversation, I'm sure you talk about carbon footprint all the time. We in the design world are in the midst of a huge conversation about cultural appropriation and, Orientalism or chinoiserie or whatever, ridiculous old terminology, and updating and making it proper and right, and thinking about, what is appropriation. And I really feel like appropriation at this moment is using things or borrowing culture, style, and not respecting it enough to know the story.
Yeah.
If it's just a prop in the narrative, then yeah, it is appropriation, and it's like lazy and gross and stupid ultimately. But the going places, and even if you don't go to the place, the learning of the story, the respecting of the history and the reasons behind, whether it's a pigment color or a geometric device to express infinity or whatever, that's what the respect is the piece that
Yeah.
needs to be.
Well, and it also just makes life so much more interesting. I mean, it makes life so much more interesting. You understand the context behind things, and you understand the origins and what they represent and what they mean. And then you have you have an environment that's layered with meaning and appreciation of multiple points of view.
Yeah, yeah, you do. Um, yeah, I was like a couple summers ago, I was reading Herodotus, and all of the Greeks going into Egypt and the Egyptians going into Greece, and that's just the contrariness of the cultures. It all has to come back to Egypt, by the way.
It's
That birthplace, that melting pot that's Egypt. It just, I gotta go, and I am gonna go with you.
you have to come. We will have the best time.
So safari style, is this just the beginning of an Indagare series?
Probably.
I mean, I would assume it's not going to be safari style too. It'll be Bohemia, or
It'll be other regions or other reasons for travel.
uh,
But
that's
before I do that, I'm actually, I haven't figured out exactly when I'm doing that, because I am starting in September with a radio show and podcast on travel on Sirius. So that's kind of my next big endeavor. And then we'll get back to the books.
how much are you sleeping these days, Melissa?
I'm quite obsessed with my sleep, Alexa. I have one of those Aura rings that I wear all the time. And so I get at least 7 hours of sleep a night.
How do you deal with jet lag?
It's quite controversial. Not people don't always love my main tip for jet lag, which is you don't eat on a plane.
Oh,
And
I've read that.
and I have had people say, "What do you mean? The whole point is getting on the plane and having champagne and that big meal." I interviewed a stewardess years ago on what that point was the longest flight in the world, was Singapore to New York, and it was 17 hours. And I asked her, "What's your trick?" And she said, "Don't eat on the plane, because when you are up at that elevation, it's like being under anesthesia, and your body shuts down and you don't digest. And so you get off the plane and you're totally exhausted because everything has to restart." And
I think my body shut down, doesn't digest. It's been years.
no, but honestly, I
Know?
swear to you, Alexa, it really works. I eat
I
before.
usually sleep, so I'm not eating on planes.
Yeah. So that's the thing. You try and get on where you're going beforehand. If I'm going to Europe, I start getting up at, the day that I'm leaving, at least no later than 4 o'clock in the morning, because that's basically 10 o'clock in Paris. And so I'll have, breakfast at right then, and then I'll have my lunch at what would be lunchtime in Paris, will be my dinner. And then I get on the plane and I go to sleep. And then you wake up and you get to go and have an amazing meal in Paris. And so, I mean, it's the little things. You want to be in the sunlight and you want to reset your body clock, but don't eat on the plane.
Would you, I mean, because I'm obsessed with travel, I'm also obsessed with airplanes.
Yes.
Do you have a favorite airline?
You know, most of the time I sleep unless it's a really long flight because I do want to get as much sleep as I can and be awake where I'm going. But yeah, I mean, I think the Air France and British Airways, I do think have great first, and if you can be in first, which a couple of times as an editor, I got to be bumped up to the first in Air France. It's pretty fantastic. They have their own special lounge and they have a car that takes you to the plane. But mostly it's, you know, I'll fly business class on something like Emirates or Qatar Airlines. Those are pretty great too.
And how have you done La Compagnie?
I have, and I've had good and bad experiences. I mean, it's a great, for people who don't know what it is, it's from Newark to Orly, I think it goes. I don't think it goes to Charles de Gaulle, but it's all business class, but it's pretty reasonable. It's like $1,200 round trip.
And it's 2 and 2.
Yeah.
Like 4 a row, period.
Yeah. The downside I've had is that sometimes, you know, if Newark can be overwhelmed and checking in Paris, if, you know, it's not a huge airline, so they may be more backed up than when they've got one with 40 counters. But it's good.
Big plane just for the there's something in my dog brain that responds to it. It's exciting.
Yeah.
Miss the planes with the stairs going up.
Yeah.
Like,
when you remember when we had to get dressed up to go on an airplane?
you know, Rimasuki.
Yeah.
I was on a flight to Greece. This is back when I was still a good parent. And she saw 3 little kids walk in, 2 boys with their blazers and their ties, and a little girl with a scarf. And she was like, wow, who are these kids? And they were my kids.
Yeah.
But that was the last time that happened. Now it's like,
They know you're lucky if you can get them out of bed to get on the plane.
I can't even point fingers at them because I'm the worst offender of all of us. So I'll stop. But you know what would be really cool if you did, especially since there's this nice Venn diagram where style is a component of Indagare. It's if you did a partnership with an airline and you got to be a part of that whole experience too. The like from front door back to front door.
You know, I wish there was an airline that I could point to and say, wow, that's super stylish. I mean, back in the day, Cathay Pacific had David Tang. You remember Shanghai Tang?
Yes.
They gave, in their business class, they gave these Shanghai Tang flannel pajamas that were brown with like the Hermes orange piping.
Yeah.
I still have them. But they gave those out in business class. And there was something super chic about all of their flight attendants' outfits. And I can't think of anyone who's doing it in a really stylish way.
I don't care about, you know, I enjoy saying flight attendants look like throwbacks, but I really don't care about what they're wearing because I just want them to be comfortable.
Yeah.
But there has to.
But they could be both. I mean, that's the thing. You could look really stylish and also be comfortable.
You'll have to let me know how to do that later. But I just think if there was a way to bring wonderment back to the travel part.
Yeah.
But I mean, I still do get excited on really enormous planes. These planes that are just marvels.
And you know, they're bringing back they're going to restart the supersonic planes. So, you know, it's not the Concorde, but it's a new version of it. And and that could be pretty great.
Yeah, I always wanted to be on the Concorde and was devastated that I never got, you know, just as a wild experience.
So wait, Alexa, did I lose you?
Okay, I'm still good. Okay, your timing for fritzing out is perfect because we're 45. Thank you so much, Melissa Briggs Bradley. Everybody go buy Safari Style from Vendome Press. It's amazing. And become a member. What does it take to become a member of Indagare?
Well, you can get our newsletter just by signing up for the newsletter on indagare.com. And the content is $3.95 a year. for the self planner membership. And then we have a custom planner membership, and we have all of our group trips listed on the website. So, you know, you can grab a spot and come with me and Alexa to Egypt next November.
Yeah, I'm gonna.
And there's lots of others. And hopefully I'll see you before that. Maybe not in the nail salon, maybe at the beach, but
Yeah,
one place or the other.
I'm midtown. I follow my lady.
Oh, okay. You left our normal nail salon. Okay, well, maybe I'll see you at the beach.
Yeah, maybe
Okay.
you
Thanks so much, Alexa. It was so much fun to see you. And
will.
give love to Kate and your mom.
I will, and
And
you too, but especially your mother.
I will.
All right, kisses, and thank you.
Kisses. Goodbye. Thanks so much.